What is going on, Panthers Nation? Carolina Dad here, your host of the Two Growls, One Roar podcast, and we have news coming out of Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina to be exact, and that is Dan Morgan has been named the general manager and president of football operations for your Carolina Panthers. Boy, do I have some thoughts about this, and I'm going to talk about them as we get into the nitty-gritty of this thing here in just a minute. But before we do that, I'd like to say welcome to everyone. Welcome to the show. This is more of my long-form podcast content. And for some of you, you're like, well, that's what I normally listen to if you listen on Apple or if you listen on Spotify. But I've actually created a ton of content over this past 2 weeks. And so I've got a big YouTube audience now, or a growing YouTube audience. And if you're not following on YouTube, please go out there and subscribe because I've put out so much stuff. But this is my normal weekly episode. So I do one weekly episode during the off season, 2 during the season. And it just so happens that this episode fell perfectly in my lap. As I was sitting there today, I was like, hey, y'all, I'm going to record my weekly episode for the Carolina Panthers tonight, and thinking I'm going to do just a general update on coaching search, do an update on GMs and who's who, who got brought in for a second interview, and we get this bombshell tonight. So Dan Morgan, again, promoted to president of football operations and general manager. So what we have learned through this, one, we have a president of football operations now. So as much as I want to bash the hire itself, and please don't get me wrong, folks, love Dan Morgan as a Panther, love him as a person, not a fan of the move. If you think about his influence, and this is where I have a bone to pick. So again, I am going to give him a benefit of the doubt. You don't have to worry about that. I'm here to hope he succeeds, just like I hope every single person that walks through that door in this organization succeeds, because if they do, we win football games, we make the playoffs, you're happy, I'm happy, everyone's happy, they're probably making a ton of money. But here we go. We've got Dan Morgan, who has really been the right-hand man for Scott Fitterer over these last 2 or 3 years. Dan Morgan, who has been involved in decision-making with this roster, with scouting, with drafts, picks, with free agency. He's been involved. And I have folks trying to tell me, well, Scott Fitterer, he may have been the ultimate decision maker. What about Matt Rule? No, dude. If you're an assistant general manager, you are going to be providing input. And yeah, there may be an opportunity that you're vetoed, but it's not like you're just going through the motions of your job. If you're a true assistant general manager that's providing feedback to the team, people are going to listen to what you have to say, and we know that Scott's going to make the ultimate decision. But that's not something I want associated with on this team. As we had hoped for this fresh restart, for this rebuild of the front office, we go in and we come out pretty even or lower than where we were. I'm like, you really needed to hire a firm in sportsology to help you make this decision. And fans who want to get kind of like, oh no, this is a great hire, I want you to think about this. There's an article on CBS Sports. It is by Jonathan Jones. You should follow him. He does a lot of Panthers content. In his article, he says, according to sources, Tepper captained the search for his next GM along with his wife, Nicole, team president, Christy Coleman, Panthers senior assistant coach and longtime NFL head coach, Jim Caldwell, and Mike Ford, who's the part of the search firm with Sportsology. So you have both Teppers, Christy Coleman, and Jim Caldwell plus Mike Ford leading this search, in this search where we've got, I don't even know, let me go back and look. We had 8 or 9 candidates? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Roughly 10 to 11 candidates interviewing. I know Disner pulled his name out. Over the weekend, we heard Brandon Brown had a second interview. We heard that Alec Hallaby of the Eagles had a second interview and that Dan Morgan had a second interview. But really, this is the spot that we land. I don't get it, man. Like, this needed to be a reset. And like I said, it's nothing about Dan. It's all about the situation. Like, we're really going to just keep going through the motions of doing this? It's tough, man. Now, I don't think this is it. So I think you are going to have a follow-up hire for someone that is going to manage the cap space. And I don't know what it's going to be called, contracts and caps. But looking at this list, based off of Alec coming in for a second interview, when you can compare Brandon Brown and Alec Halaby, Brandon Brown is more of your true GM role, which Dan Morgan occupies now. So I kind of rule him out, although, unless he's coming in for scouting, because he does have a lot of background in scouting. Alec Halaby is more of your analytics, data-driven, cap management, roster management guy. So if we're going to do this pairing of what we are creating with football operations and a GM, there is a possibility in my mind that we do still bring someone on in one of these additional roles. I haven't heard about Brant Tillis of the Chiefs coming back for a second interview, but would love to see that. And here's the thing about this whole thing, and I tweeted it out, and Mike Kay kind of put together a really nice summary of his initial thoughts as well. So go out, you can look up Mike Kay of the Charlotte Observer on X, get his opinion. I piggybacked off of his thoughts, and honestly, let me go in and read part of what he said, because there was some value in it, and that value kind of opened my eyes, or at least set my opinion about how I see things. So this was his mini take, and I'll tell you what I said. Like it or not, Tepper needed someone in lockstep with the decision to trade up for and ultimately draft Bryce Young. That's it. The team is obviously extremely invested in the quarterback. Regarding the personnel miscues in Morgan's department, I think the misses have been more circumstantial than overarching evaluation pitfalls. Like, that part's true. But I think those first two sentences sums it up. That's everything there. Like it or not, Tepper needed someone in lockstep with the decision to trade up for and draft Bryce Young. The team is invested, ultimately, extremely invested in this quarterback. And that's exactly it, because you heard me talk about make it or break it for Bryce Young. And I'm telling you, I'm not saying that he's going to fail, but this is make it or break it. And this furthers that narrative that this was Tepper's decision to draft Bryce Young. Again, I'm a Bryce Young supporter, but this all adds up. So that's what I said. I said part of this furthers that narrative. I don't think he could stand seeing Bryce Young fail and then have a new GM who is not a part of deciding to trade up for Bryce, who was going to be this game changer, this franchise changer, come in and say, hey, you know what? We actually need to reset at the quarterback position in 2 years, and Bryce is out of here. Again, I'm not saying that Bryce is going to fail, but that's the narrative that you have to think about. You have Tepper bringing in, again, the crew that he put together to do these interviews, and then to go with the internal candidate. It's another letdown, man. And I was really, really just feeling like this was going to be a really good offseason for the Panthers. Not that we were getting back on track all the way, but it's like we've got an opportunity to at least start to head in the right direction with this full reset. And here we are pulling in a guy that's already been here. And here's the kicker. As I was going through doing my research, I like to find tidbits of information just like you. And I'm a big fan of the media guides. So you can look these up. Just go out and search for the media guides for all the NFL teams. Have good write-ups on the teams, tons of facts. Panthers is 474 pages. I have not read every page, but I know, high level, I go through most of it. So before this season, Dan Morgan was the assistant general manager. And we'll talk about his history in a second, because he does have some good history. I'm not going to completely bash him right now. But this is the kicker that got me. Morgan has assisted general manager Scott Fitter reshaping Carolina's roster, including a trade up for the first overall pick in the 2023 NFL Draft where the team selected quarterback Bryce Young. Reshaping the roster, helping him trade up, or making the decision to trade up for Bryce Young. The two things that you need to know. Those things are now omitted, deleted from Dan Morgan's profile on the Carolina Panthers website, because this was basically spot on to what was on the website. And I understand it. You don't want to be associated with Scott Fitter, but I'm like, you really think fans are dumb enough to sit here and say, oh yeah, I guess he really is going to be the real deal and this new fresh start, and he played for us, and man, things are going to be so good. No, man, I'm going into the nitty-gritty weeds over here, bro. You can't run that by me. You're going to give him credit for doing these things in association with Scott Fitter on one hand, and you flip it over and then you say, nah, you know what? Actually, let's discredit that and let's remove him. And you know what? Dan Morgan didn't really have anything to do with it. That's the story that's being told by this entire situation. It frustrates me. It really does. So let's talk about Dan. Dan now will be in his fourth season with the Panthers, started way back in, actually talking about where he started. He was a former first-round pick for the Carolina Panthers in 2001, returned in May of 2021 after 10-plus season in NFL offices. Prior to joining the Panthers, Morgan spent 3 years with the Buffalo Bills as director of player personnel. While with Buffalo, the team made 2 playoff appearances, including a trip to the AFC Championship. Sorry, RIP to Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. They cannot get over that hump. Another tough loss there. His front office experience did start in Seattle, actually ties to Scott Fitter, believe it or not just here in Carolina. In 2010, in his second season with the Seahawks, he was named assistant director of pro personnel. He held that for 4 seasons, including their Super Bowl run. He was later promoted to director of pro personnel. He was responsible for guiding the pro and advanced scouting efforts for the club. Talked about his selection in the 2001 NFL Draft. He had a single season high 102 tackles and a Super Bowl record at the time. I guess it was a franchise record for 25 tackles in the Super Bowl. Like, he was a boss. He ended up losing that game. Inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame in 2021. He was the first player to be named captain as a sophomore at the University of Miami. Won the Buckus Award. Another award, a few other awards for linebackers. Becoming the first player in NCAA history to win all 3 in a career, while he earned All-American honors. Great player. Fantastic player. Great person. Is he the man to get to right this ship for the Carolina Panthers? That is to be determined. As I've gotten my rant out of the way in this decision making, I am going to turn to the positive. He was here with a lot of the players that have been around. We can see the two moves that he made right as the season ended. It's go time, man. It's time for us to see what he is going to do, because we heard last year about dropping in quarterbacks, like I've talked about, being improved in every aspect of the roster. What worries me, though, is like this just feels like another yes man. Another yes man for Tepper to say whatever he wants, do whatever he wants, and maybe things will truly change. Maybe this is the opportunity for us to just change direction, but it's hard for me to believe that right now. Now, talking through the downstream impacts of this, well, guess what? Talked about having a GM in place before we hired a coach, and that's happened. Now we have our general manager, and when I tweeted this out, I tweeted the Michael Jordan Last Dance valet person, hotel, whoever it was, worker, where the guy does the little shrug. Like, yeah, I guess that's a positive news for us. Well, we got our GM before our coach. I do think things are going to heat up, and I think we should talk about the state of the coaching search right now, because as I recorded this, there's been news that right before I recorded this, news that came out. One being Brian Johnson, who's the offensive coordinator of the Eagles, seems to be out of contention. And the writing was on the wall. I kind of said that because when I tracked this, 11 out of 12 coaches had gotten through their initial virtual interviews, and we just never heard an update from Brian Johnson about getting it scheduled or having it completed. I thought maybe it happened over the weekend. It didn't. Sounds like they're just going to let that be. So he's been removed. Brian Callahan, offensive coordinator for the Bengals, is now the coach of the Tennessee Titans. And talk about a curveball. You go from Mike Vrabel, to Brian Callahan. I don't know how much of an upgrade that is. You get your offensive-minded guy, I guess. I'm glad he isn't here. And that's not a knock on Brian Callahan. There were people trying to peg, ESPN wanted to peg Callahan to Carolina, and I wasn't believing in it. That's just like people with using the quote-unquote betting odds to try to say that those are the favorites when, Kellen Moore is listed as a favorite and he hasn't even had an interview this year. All right, my rant's over. 3 coaches have been reported to be moving forward for a second interview, which would be an in-person interview. Raheem Morris, defensive coordinator for the Rams. Dave Canales, offensive coordinator for the Buccaneers. And then Ejiro Evero was supposed to have his today. So I'm recording this on Monday, January 22nd. He was supposed to have it today. I haven't seen a full update now with the GM news coming out. Hard to know. You start to think about the other coaches that are in the cycle. One, Chris Tabor. I think you could probably eliminate him. But we got a few coaches, 3, that are tied up in championship games, so we can't interview them this week. Ben Johnson, biggest name for the Detroit Lions, NFC Championship. Both coordinators for the Ravens. Mike McDonald and Todd Monken. And hey, 2 seconds while I plug the Ravens, because it wasn't on my normal podcast. Y'all have heard me talk about Nolan. I got Nolan on the show last week. It's on YouTube exclusively. So go out to YouTube. You can see our predictions for the game. He's going to be back this week as we talk through the Ravens and their hopeful push into a Super Bowl run. See if they can get it done. So just sidebar there. So these 3 coaches, Raheem Morris, Dave Canales, Ejiro Evero. But like I say, Mike McDonald and Todd Monken for the Ravens are tied up. The thing about this, though, when I'm looking at other teams, Atlanta Falcons, who's just interviewing everybody left and right and bringing everybody in, I looked at the Atlanta Falcons, and they have requested some of these coaches who are in the playoffs. So I was under the impression, maybe we're not even going to ask these guys yet, or at least report on it. Maybe that's the case. We're just not going to report on it. But I saw the Atlanta Falcons had requested an interview with, and I don't even remember who it was. It might have been Mike McDonald, who's in the playoffs in the AFC Championship. So maybe we do see that. I know people want to see the Ben Johnson move. There's a lot of chess pieces happening because you have the Raiders job locked up. You've got the Titans job. Things are getting tight. The Patriots running out of jobs. I still believe, people will ask me about Bobby Slowick. I don't think it's his year. With the job shrinking, it could be, but I still think he goes back, like I said from the very beginning, and maybe I'm proven wrong. But where we need to shift our focus, fans, is thinking about who is going to run the show, who's a true candidate. And I'll tell you, Dave Canales, as I'm starting to play this out, it feels to me like Dave Canales may have a little bit of an edge. You think about us allowing Thomas Brown to interview elsewhere, and I don't think Thomas Brown's going to be back. One benefit of bringing in an offensive coordinator as a head coach is, one, they can call the offense. Different situation than Frank Reich. But 2, they bring their own guy to be the coordinator, but you get to retain your defensive coordinator in Ejiro Evero and special teams in Chris Tabor. And there's no guarantee that Ejiro doesn't get an offer at some point. Now, the jobs are slimming out. I mean, Callahan was supposed to interview with the Panthers tomorrow, which is Tuesday, and that didn't happen. That's how quickly the landscape of this entire situation is changing. If I had to, give a preference, I think the easy thing to say is Ben Johnson, but it's hard for me to imagine him coming here. Talked extensively about that. But I think, Canales is growing on me. People have talked about his work with different quarterbacks, 1 being Russell Wilson, 2 being Baker Mayfield. And I know Geno Smith's a little bit bigger, but you look at what he did with Geno Smith as well. But he's worked with those guys, primarily Russell and Baker, smaller quarterbacks, and he's able to build out pretty good offense around them. So for me, I'm like, I do like it, and I like what I saw. Like, the Buccaneers put together a heck of a fight, man. And I know they've got some weapons as far as, Mike Evans, what they have on the offensive side of the ball. But at the same time, scheming together that game plan, they were pretty much throwing punches back and forth with the Detroit Lions, who look like one heck of a football team. So, yeah, I don't know, y'all. I don't really know what else to say on the front of the search this week. I guess we'll close this out. It's been one heck of a week, just trying to get through all this. I'm just ready for next year for us not to have to do this. Like maybe we have a coordinator who's interviewing somewhere else, and that's our only worry. Not coaches and GMs, and oh my gosh, so we can just do mock drafts and free agency. That'll be good times. Well, folks, if you enjoyed the show, I appreciate it. So if you are on YouTube, please subscribe, drop a comment, follow me on X, or listen wherever you get your podcast. This is Carolina Dad. Y'all have a good one.